They told me to sit down. That's how it started. That's the moment it all changed. Not with a firework or a thunderbolt, but with a sentence that hit like a punch to the chest. I had volunteered for the robotics program down at the community center, just 1 day a week, nothing fancy. The flyer said, "All ages welcome," and I believed it, foolishly maybe. The girl at the front desk didn't even look me in the eyes when she said it. "We appreciate your interest, Mr. Henderson, but we're looking for someone with more physical agility." She coughed into her sleeve, and when I asked her what that meant, she hesitated, then mumbled something about liability, risk, falling, my knee brace. Then the final blow, "Maybe just come and observe." Observe. Like I was some kind of historical artifact being wheeled into a museum. I nodded politely, thanked her, then turned and walked out, though it took every bit of strength in my stiff, aching legs not to limp. Pride makes you walk straighter than your bones allow. Outside, it had started to snow, the first of the season, and I stood there for a second, coat open, breath curling up in front of me like a ghost. My truck groaned to life after the third turn of the key, and as I sat there, hands on the wheel, not going anywhere, the radio played some overhyped political argument, and then, right in the middle of the static, Elon Musk's voice cut through like a scalpel. "You can build the future at any age," he said. Just like that. Like he was talking to me. He was doing one of those interviews again, the ones where he's either a genius or a lunatic depending on who you ask. But something about the way he said it, flat, confident, like it wasn't a theory, but a law of nature, something in it cracked the ice forming around my chest. I pulled into the driveway of the house I'd lived in for over 40 years, the house where my wife, Barbara, raised Kyle with me, the house where I built go-karts and repaired lawnmowers and tried, for a while, to build a tiny wind turbine that never worked. These days, the garage was more storage than workshop, cluttered with rusted tools and half-used cans of paint, but every now and then, when I had the energy, I'd open it up just to smell the sawdust and remember who I used to be. I sat at the kitchen table that night eating a microwave dinner I couldn't taste, the TV muttering in the background about Mars colonies and AI chips and battery breakthroughs, but none of that felt like it belonged to me. It all felt like someone else's future. That's the thing about getting old. People think it happens slowly, like a steady drift, but sometimes it comes all at once. One day you're relevant, and the next, you're a burden. A cautionary tale. A background extra. I pulled up an old laptop that barely worked anymore and typed, "You can build the future at any age," into a search bar. It brought up a video, a clip from a podcast interview Elon had done just weeks ago. "People think time is the enemy," he said, leaning back in a chair, voice calm but sharp. But it's not. Inaction is the enemy. Waiting. That's what kills dreams. I watched that line maybe a dozen times, something in it clawing at a part of me I hadn't touched in years. It's funny how regret sneaks up on you. You think you're done with dreams, and then one sentence tears open the whole dam. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the look on that girl's face at the community center, the way she smiled like she was doing me a favor by letting me fade quietly into the background. And I kept thinking about that old quote, "Most men die at 25 but aren't buried until 75. Maybe I was already buried. The next morning, I opened the garage. The air inside was cold and stale, but it smelled like the past, oil, wood, steel. I looked at the workbench, dusty but solid. I picked up an old screwdriver, turned it in my hand. It felt heavier than I remembered. I stood there for what must have been half an hour, just standing, until my knees barked at me to sit down. But I didn't. I turned on the old space heater, cleared a corner of the bench, and started wiping things down. That afternoon, I walked half a mile around the block, first time in months. My legs screamed, my chest burned, but when I made it back to the house, I felt something weird. Pride. Not in what I'd done, but in the fact that I'd done anything at all. That night, I dreamed I was on Mars. I was standing on red dirt, sky dark and endless, stars like pinpricks through a velvet curtain. In the distance, a dome lit up like a lantern, and walking toward me was Elon Musk. He looked like he always does, half genius, half guy who just woke up. Except in the dream, he wasn't talking to a camera or a crowd. He was talking to me. In 5 years, he said, the ones who dared will rule the world. I didn't answer. I just stared. No one's coming to save you, he continued. That's why you must build. I started to say something, but he cut me off. I won't replace you. Inaction will. He paused. The hardest reboot is the human spirit. Then he looked at me, really looked, and said, you're not too old. You're right on time. I woke up in a sweat, heart pounding like I'd run a marathon, which, let's be honest, I haven't even jogged since 1996. I sat up, looked around my dim bedroom, heard the wind scratching at the windows. I whispered to the dark, right on time for what? The next morning, I wrote down everything he said. Every line. I put them on sticky notes and slapped them on the fridge, the garage wall, even the bathroom mirror. I ordered a robotics kit online, beginner level, meant for kids, but I didn't care. It arrived 3 days later in a bright box with cartoon robots on it. I opened it like it was sacred. The instructions were confusing, the parts tiny, my hands clumsy, but I didn't stop. Not because I knew what I was doing, hell, I didn't, but because for the first time in years, I wanted to learn. I wanted to try. I kept the radio off and the TV silent. Just the hum of the heater, the scrape of metal, and the occasional bark of my old knee when I bent too far. And in the back of my mind, always, you're not too old. You're right on time. Maybe I am. Maybe we all are. Maybe what we need isn't more time, but the belief that what time we have still matters. They told me to sit down. But I didn't. Not this time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before the arthritis, before Barbara got sick, before Kyle stopped answering his phone, I was a man who built things. Not for money, not for glory, just for the love of making something real, something useful, something that hummed when you touched it. I still remember the first thing I ever built with my own hands that worked. It was a tiny crystal radio kit, the kind you used to order from the back of Popular Mechanics. I was 12 years old, lying belly down on the living room carpet, soldering wires to a piece of cardboard while my father muttered from behind his newspaper about burning the house down. But I got it working. Tinny voices came through the earpiece like ghosts, and I remember thinking that if I could pull sound out of thin air, maybe I could pull a future out of nothing too. That feeling stayed with me, even when life didn't go the way I'd imagined. I didn't go to college. Never had the money. Went straight into auto work after high school, started as a grease monkey in a cold Michigan shop, worked my way up to lead mechanic by 35, and ran diagnostics better than the machines themselves. Customers used to say I had magic hands. I laughed it off, but I knew they weren't wrong. My hands could solve things. When Kyle was 7, I built him a go-kart out of scrap metal and a busted lawnmower engine. We worked on it together in the garage. Him with his tiny plastic goggles, me showing him how to twist the socket wrench just right. We painted it blue with white stripes and called it the Lightning. It wasn't fast, but it was ours. He'd zip up and down the driveway, grinning like he was on the moon. Barbara would sit on the porch with a glass of iced tea, laughing every time he hit the garbage cans. That was when we were still a family. Before the accidents and the arguments and the long silences. Barbara got diagnosed with ovarian cancer the same year I turned 58. We caught it late. We always thought we'd have more time. She fought hard, chemo, radiation, surgery, but it wore her down fast. Her hands, which used to bake the best damn apple pie in Genesee County, trembled by the end. I remember holding them in hospice, her skin cold and paper-thin, her eyes already looking somewhere past me. I said something stupid like, "You'll feel better soon." She just smiled and said, "Walter, build something beautiful when I'm gone." And then she was. Kyle didn't take it well. He blamed me for not pushing Mom to do more treatments, not flying her to some fancy hospital out west. He was living in Chicago by then, working in software, making money I couldn't even count. He flew in for the funeral, stayed exactly 23 hours, and left without looking back. We haven't spoken face to face since. I tried calling. Left messages. Wrote letters I never sent. The truth is, I don't blame him. Not really. I wasn't great at expressing things. I could fix a transmission blindfolded but couldn't say, "I miss you," without choking on the words. The day he drove away, I stood in the driveway and waved until his taillights disappeared. Then I walked into the garage and stood there for a long time, just breathing the old smells, grease, sawdust, paint thinner. I picked up a wrench and put it back down. And I didn't build a damn thing after that. Years passed. Retirement came not with a celebration but a handshake and a box of my things. The shop changed owners. All the new guys used tablets instead of torque wrenches. They didn't need me. The house grew quieter. The radio played to an empty kitchen. Neighbors moved. New ones came, young couples with loud kids and louder cars. I watched from the window. Sometimes I didn't even realize I'd been standing there for hours. The TV became my companion, endless loops of bad news, medical ads, reruns from better decades. My joints stiffened. My hair thinned. I stopped shaving for a while, then forgot why I ever started again. The light in the garage bulb burned out and I never replaced it. I told myself it was because the ladder hurt my knees, but the truth is I didn't want to see what was gathering dust out there. And yet, every once in a while, I'd open that door. Let the sunlight pour in like memory. I'd trace my fingers along the bench, the vice grip, the framed photo of Kyle holding his first screwdriver. And I'd ache, not just in my bones but in my spirit. Because I remembered what it felt like to make. To matter. There was one memory I kept locked in a mental box, only opening it when I was desperate for warmth. It was a summer day, 1993. Kyle and I were building a wooden glider, one of those science fair projects that looked simple but required a miracle to stay airborne. We'd spent the whole weekend sanding, balancing, tweaking the wings. Barbara brought out lemonade and sandwiches, and we sat under the shade tree out back. Kyle turned to me and said, "Do you think I could be an inventor like Edison or Tesla?" I said, "You can be whatever you want, kiddo. You've got the hands and the mind." He beamed. Later that day, the glider soared across the backyard and crashed into the shed, but it didn't matter. We'd built it. Together. That day was the last time I felt truly connected to both of them at once. Since then, life moved in slow reverse. Less light. Less laughter. More prescriptions. More shadows. And yet, when I heard Elon's voice that night on the radio, "You can build the future at any age," it unlocked something I'd buried beneath years of silence and sorrow. It wasn't just a catchy line. It was a challenge. A dare. Like he was speaking to the version of me who still believed in wind turbines, who still believed in go-karts and gliders and pulling sound from thin air. I sat in the living room that night staring at that old framed picture of Kyle and me holding the lightning trophy we won at the county fair. My knees ached. My chest felt tight. But something else was stirring, something I thought had died with Barbara. Possibility. I whispered to the photo, "Maybe I'm not done yet." The next morning, I limped out to the garage, flipped the breaker, and replaced the damn light bulb. It flickered, then glowed. Weak, but steady. I opened the window, let the wind sweep out the cobwebs. I turned on the old radio, the one Kyle and I rigged with a custom antenna back in high school. Static filled the air, then a soft jazz tune. I smiled. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I cleared the workbench. Piece by piece, I moved the junk aside. Found my old multimeter. Still worked. Found a drawer full of resistors and wires. Rusted, but salvageable. I opened a browser on the laptop and typed Arduino kits for beginners. One popped up with a discount. I ordered it without thinking. $49. Free shipping. That evening, I sat at the table, warmed a bowl of soup, and watched another Elon Musk clip on YouTube. He was talking about colonizing Mars, about taking risks, about how fear kills more dreams than failure ever will. Then he said something that stopped me cold. People assume the future belongs to the young. But the ones who've lived longest carry the deepest wisdom. If they dare to act, they're unstoppable. I turned off the video, closed my eyes, and said to the silence, "All right then. Let's see if there's any future left in these hands." The kit arrived 3 days later. I sliced the box open with my pocket knife, the one Barbara gave me on our 10th anniversary, initials etched into the handle. Inside were wires, boards, LEDs, resistors, tiny parts brimming with potential. I didn't know half of what they did anymore. But I knew how to learn. I knew how to try. That's what I'd forgotten all these years. Not the knowledge. The will. I pulled out the instruction manual, squinted at the diagrams, and felt that old surge, curiosity mixed with terror. My fingers shook. My vision blurred. But I didn't stop. Not this time. I got the first LED to blink after 6 hours. 6 hours. I cheered like a man who just walked on the moon. I danced in my slippers. I imagined Barbara rolling her eyes, calling me a show-off. I imagined Kyle as a kid, clapping. That night, I dreamed again. Elon stood in the garage this time. Not Mars. Just my cluttered, sacred garage. He looked around, nodded, and said, "You're starting to remember who you are." I woke up with tears on my cheeks. I didn't feel foolish. I felt alive. The snow had stuck overnight, not heavy but enough to turn the neighborhood into a quiet museum of white rooftops and half-shoveled sidewalks, everything still and muffled like the world had paused for a moment. I sat at the kitchen window with a lukewarm mug of instant coffee, watching the neighbor's teenage son scrape ice off his windshield like he was trying to erase a mistake. I used to do that for Kyle when he still lived at home, back when he had zero interest in learning how engines worked but couldn't get enough of their sounds. He'd sit next to me in the shop, asking questions I barely had time to answer, his eyes lighting up every time something sparked or turned. That kid is long gone now, replaced by a man I barely know, one who only contacts me through quarterly emails and forwarded holiday e-cards from an office assistant. I sipped the coffee, bitter and chalky, and muttered to myself, "Well, today's another one for the books," though I didn't have any books left worth writing in. My back ached from the night before. I'd spent too long hunched over the garage workbench trying to understand the difference between a jumper wire and a resistor array, watching online tutorials through greasy bifocals, pausing every few seconds to scribble notes. But I'd gotten something to work. One little red light, blinking in perfect rhythm like a tiny heartbeat. That stupid little light had kept me up till nearly 2 a.m., not because I was confused but because I couldn't stop staring at it. I kept whispering, "It works," as if it might stop if I broke the spell. I hadn't felt that particular brand of pride since Kyle hit a home run in Little League and pointed at me in the bleachers like I was the one who taught him to swing. Maybe I had. I turned away from the window and limped into the living room, the arthritis in my right knee flaring like a torch as I eased myself into the recliner, which had stopped reclining 6 months ago. The morning news was on, but I kept it muted, just watching the anchors smile at invisible jokes while the churn scrolled a list of disasters, inflation rates, layoffs, tech layoffs, war rumors, celebrity divorces, and something about another rocket launch. I squinted at the screen. SpaceX. Another successful booster landing. I unmuted just in time to hear Elon's voice, live from some press conference, answering a question about legacy. "I don't care what people think of me," he said calmly. "I care whether we did something meaningful with our time. Whether we built something that outlasted us." I stared at the screen like it owed me money. Not because I disagreed, but because I did care what people thought of me. I cared that my son hadn't called. That the kids at the community center thought I was some relic. That the world had moved on and I was still here, sitting in the ruins of who I used to be. The anchors moved on to a story about a TikTok trend where people pretend to be old. I shut the TV off, disgusted. Pretend to be old. They had no idea. Being old isn't funny. It's watching your body betray you one part at a time. It's being talked over in conversations like you're not there. It's seeing commercials with smiling gray-haired models dancing through retirement villages while you count pennies to cover heating bills. It's not just pain, it's invisibility. I sat in that chair for almost an hour, motionless except for my thumb rubbing the edge of the armrest like it could wear away the fabric and expose something real underneath. My mind kept returning to that blinking LED in the garage, that tiny red promise that maybe, just maybe, there was still something left to build. But then another voice rose up in my head, louder, meaner, the voice that sounds like mine but older and more bitter. "What's the point? So you light up a little bulb. You think anyone cares? You think Kyle cares? You think you're going to be some kind of inventor now? At your age?" I closed my eyes. Breathed. Tried to drown it out. But that's the war no one talks about, the one inside your own damn head. It's not the doctor telling you to slow down, or the neighbor laughing when you order a beginner robotics kit. It's the part of you that agrees with them. That says, yeah, maybe it's time to sit down. And some days, I almost listen. That afternoon, I went to the pharmacy to pick up another round of prescriptions: blood pressure, cholesterol, joint pain. The pharmacist was young, cheerful, called me "sir" like she was addressing a museum docent. On the way out, I passed a bulletin board with flyers pinned to it: babysitting services, piano lessons, someone selling a barely used treadmill. And one bright orange sheet caught my eye: Community Robotics Expo, volunteers wanted, all ages encouraged. I pulled it down and held it in my hand. Same center that had turned me away last week. Probably the same girl at the desk. But the flyer said, encouraged. I folded it and slid it into my coat pocket, feeling like a fool for even considering it. I got into my truck and didn't drive home right away. I just sat there, engine running, heater blowing lukewarm air, watching people hustle in and out of the pharmacy like ants with schedules. And then something happened. I don't know why. Maybe it was the dream. Maybe it was the blinking light. Maybe it was Elon's voice from that interview rattling around in my skull like a loose bolt. But I pulled out my phone, the same phone I swore I'd never use for anything other than calls, and I opened the camera. I walked around to the back of the truck, popped the tailgate, pulled out the little breadboard with the blinking LED, and held it up. The light was still going. Still alive. I snapped a picture, shaky but clear. Then I went back inside, found the girl at the front desk, and dropped the flyer on the counter. She looked up, startled. "I want to volunteer," I said, staring her dead in the eye. "And I've already built something. Want to see?" She hesitated, probably trying to find a polite way to say no, but I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo. To her credit, she looked impressed. Not blown away, not like I'd discovered cold fusion, but impressed. "You made that?" she asked. "From a kit, but yeah," I said. "Taught myself." She nodded slowly. "We actually do need someone to help with the beginner station. Mostly just wiring stuff. It's next Saturday." I didn't smile. Didn't want to spook her. Just nodded. I'll be there. I walked out of that building with my head a little higher. The snow had started again, soft and slow, but I barely noticed it. I drove home with both windows cracked and the radio off, letting the wind in. When I got back to the garage, I cleared more space on the bench. Hung a new light. Cleaned off an old pegboard and started hanging tools. Not because anyone asked me to. Not because it would go viral or earn me a dime. But because it felt right. That night, I wrote a short post on the Community Maker Forum. Nothing flashy. Just a picture of the breadboard, the blinking light, and a caption, 67 years old. First time trying this. Feels good to build again. I clicked post. Didn't expect much. Went to bed. Around 2 a.m., I got up to pee and checked the phone. 47 comments. All of them kind. Encouraging. One said, "My dad passed last year. He would have loved this. Thank you." I stared at that comment for a long time. Then I turned off the phone, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling. Everything I loved felt like it was in the rearview mirror. But maybe, just maybe, I was starting to build something new. Something I could still love. The Saturday of the Robotics Expo came colder than expected, the kind of wind that sliced through your coat no matter how thick, but I didn't care. I was up before the sun, boots laced, coffee brewed, breadboard packed carefully in a shoebox cushioned with an old t-shirt that said Genesee Auto, EST 1986, and for the first time in years I didn't need to force myself to leave the house. The nerves hit halfway there. As the truck crawled past familiar neighborhoods dressed in early frost, I started thinking about what could go wrong. What if no one wanted me there? What if I couldn't keep up? What if I forgot what little I'd learned? That voice, the one I thought I'd silenced, crept in like a cold draft through a cracked window. You're too slow. Too old. Too late. But then I remembered the blinking LED, still sitting on my garage bench, still flashing like a heartbeat refusing to quit, and I gripped the wheel tighter and muttered under my breath, "Screw that. Not today." I pulled into the lot just as they were setting up. Long folding tables covered in wires, laptops, robot arms, 3D printed parts. Kids running around in bright t-shirts with names like Circuit Squad and Bot Force. The banner said Mid-Michigan Youth Robotics Expo, and suddenly I felt like I'd walked into the future wearing clothes from the past. I spotted the girl from the front desk. Her name was Megan, I'd finally asked, and she waved me over with a smile that didn't feel fake this time. "Mr. Henderson, right? Glad you made it." "Walt's fine," I said. "And I don't usually do mornings this early unless something's broken." She laughed, handed me a volunteer badge, and led me to the beginner station, a table with simple breadboards, battery packs, LEDs, and laminated instruction cards. "You'll be helping the level 1 kids," she said. "Mostly wiring and basic circuits. They'll be in groups of 3. I nodded. "Got it." Then I added, "I built one of these last week. Took me 6 hours." She looked surprised. "Well, you're ahead of most of them already." The first group arrived, 3 kids who looked about 10 or 11, 2 boys with buzz cuts and a girl wearing a hoodie with a cartoon astronaut. They sat down, already jostling each other like puppies, and one of them asked without looking up, "You the robot guy?" "Sort of," I said, "but don't let the beard fool you. I'm still figuring this stuff out, too." That made the girl smile. They got to work, and I guided them through connecting the power rail, checking the polarity, and making sure they didn't blow the LED by skipping the resistor. At first, I was nervous. My fingers trembled when I picked up the wires, and I second-guessed every instruction. But something strange happened. I started remembering. Not just the process, but the feeling. The way problem-solving lit up a part of your brain that didn't care how old you were. The way a kid's eyes widened when something they touched came alive. And it wasn't just the kids. As the morning wore on, more adults wandered over, parents, coaches, even a few curious onlookers, and they listened when I explained things. One father asked how I got started. I said, 2 weeks ago, I didn't know a breadboard from a bread box. Now I'm helping your kid blink a light. He laughed and clapped me on the back. We need more folks like you. There was a moment around noon when one of the girls, Emily, maybe 8, got her LED to blink for the first time. She squealed, jumped up, and hugged me around the waist like I was Santa Claus. Her mom took a photo. I stood there blinking, not sure how to react, heart swollen and confused. When they left, the mom turned and said, "She's going to remember this day forever." Thank you. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and went back to organizing resistors. At the end of the day, Megan walked over as I was packing up. "You were great today," she said. "Some of those kids said you made them want to be engineers." "Well, now I feel like I should actually learn what I'm doing," I said. She smiled, then asked the question I didn't expect. "Would you want to come back? Maybe run a regular Saturday beginner session?" I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands, fingers still stained with graphite and old calluses, and thought about how long it had been since anyone offered me something that wasn't a discount or a sympathy check. Then I said, "Yeah. I'd like that." Driving home, the sky turning pink behind the pines, I felt something I hadn't in years: momentum. Not just motion, but meaningful motion. The kind that builds. That night, I logged back onto the Maker forum and posted a photo of the beginner table at the expo. Caption: First workshop. First time teaching. They made things light up, and so did I. Dozens of comments poured in. People asking questions, sharing their own stories. A woman from Oregon wrote, "My dad's 72 and wants to learn Arduino. I showed him your post. Now he's signing up for a class." I stared at that comment for a long time, then clicked over to an interview clip I'd saved from Elon's latest Starship update. In it, a reporter asked him about fear. "You don't seem afraid to fail," she said. He smiled, that crooked grin like he knew something the rest of us didn't. "Fear is useful if it keeps you alive," he said. "But most fear doesn't. Most fear keeps you small." I paused the video there, rewound it, played that line again. Most fear keeps you small. I wrote that on a sticky note and slapped it on the fridge, right next to "You're not too old. You're right on time." I didn't sleep much. My mind buzzed with ideas, memories, questions. I found myself sketching out a project, a simple line-following robot made from cardboard and tape. Nothing fancy. Just something I could build with the kids next time. I pulled out Barbara's old measuring tape and started jotting dimensions. Around 3 a.m., I walked out to the garage in my slippers, turned on the light, and began sorting through motors I hadn't touched in a decade. It felt like something sacred. Like opening a tomb and finding seeds that still wanted to grow. The next morning, I emailed Kyle. Just a short note. Built a robot with some kids yesterday. Thought of you. You were always good at this stuff. Hope you're well. Dad. I didn't expect a reply. And I didn't need one. Not yet. Sending it felt like planting a flag. That week, I returned to the community center. I started cleaning up the supply closet. Megan gave me keys. One of the janitors stopped me and said, "You're the robot guy, right?" I laughed. Apparently. On Thursday night, I held my first solo workshop, 6 kids, all under 12, building blinking circuits. We failed. We messed up. One kid dropped a battery pack in his juice box. But we laughed, we fixed things, and by the end of it, every light was blinking. And so was mine. Walking back to my truck in the dark, wind howling across the empty lot, I felt something settle in my bones. Not pain. Not stiffness. Something deeper. Like purpose had come home again. I thought about Elon's voice. Build something that outlasts you. I didn't know if these Saturday workshops would outlast me. I didn't know if any of it mattered to the world. But it mattered to me. And maybe that was the first spark. Maybe that was enough to start a fire. The email came 3 days later, long after I had convinced myself it never would, after I had checked my inbox for the 10th time that day and muttered that I was being ridiculous, that Kyle wouldn't write back, that he probably hadn't even opened the message, that it had been swallowed into whatever digital void successful people like him toss their inconvenient fathers into, but there it was, short subject line, just his name. And as I clicked it, my hand trembled like I was about to open a letter from someone who died a long time ago, because in some ways, he had, or at least the version of him who used to beg me for stories about combustion engines and sleep on the garage floor while I rebuilt carburetors was gone, and now all that remained was the possibility of something new, a thin thread of connection knotted by a blinking LED and a memory. And the email itself was simple, almost formal, like he didn't want to say too much but also couldn't not reply. It read, "Hey Dad, that's really cool. Glad to hear you're still building. I remember the go-kart, we called it Lightning, right? Hope you're well. Kyle," and that was it, no sign-off of love or mention of calling soon, but it didn't matter, because just seeing those words, "Glad to hear you're still building," felt like oxygen after years of breathing through a straw, and I sat there at my kitchen table, blinking back something that might have been tears but didn't quite make it to the surface, and I whispered, "He remembers," like that was enough, like that memory alone was a key to something I thought had rusted shut, and suddenly I was remembering more than I'd intended, more than just Kyle as a boy but me as a father, as a man, in all my flawed, quiet, work-hardened attempts at showing love through acts rather than words, a full tank of gas before a long trip, a lunch packed in silence, an engine tuned just right, all the things I never said but tried to show, and now here was my son. Older, distant, but still tethered to that memory of us building something together, of lightning in the driveway, crashing into the garbage cans, of laughter from the porch where Barbara watched us like we were a story she already knew the ending to, and it made me wonder what other memories he still held, what else might be hiding behind that short reply. If maybe he sometimes sat alone in his city apartment and remembered the way I handed him a wrench and told him to trust his grip, not the instructions, and maybe, just maybe, he wanted to build something again too, so I wrote him back, slower this time, more deliberate, "Yeah, Lightning. You loved that thing. I still have the photo of us at the county fair with the trophy. Funny how it all comes back. I've been teaching some workshops at the community center, nothing big, but it feels good to help the kids learn. Think you'd like it. We've got a cardboard robot in the works. Let me know if you want to see pictures. No pressure. Just proud of you. Always have been. Dad," and I stared at that last line before sending it, felt like I was lifting something heavy and long buried, and I hit send before I could talk myself out of it, then sat back in the chair and let the silence settle in, not lonely this time, just full. Like the air right before a summer rain, heavy with things unsaid, and that evening, I went out to the garage with new eyes, pulled out the robot prototype the kids and I had started, and looked at it not just as a project but as a message, a symbol, a bridge, because every circuit was a connection and every motor was a question: what could we still make, what could still move forward, what part of the future still belonged to me. And I worked until midnight adjusting the chassis, reinforcing the wheels, tightening the sensors, and by the end of it the thing actually moved in a straight line, slow but steady, like a little cardboard tank trying to prove something to the world, and when it bumped into a paint can and turned itself around, I laughed, a full laugh, not the kind that breaks halfway through, and said out loud, "Look at you go." Like I was talking to a child learning to walk, and in a way, I was, because every creation I made now felt like some small version of myself learning to move forward again, even after all the years, all the silence, all the regrets, and I didn't need the robot to be perfect, I just needed it to try, and maybe that's what Elon had been getting at in that clip I watched again that night, the one where he talks about momentum, about not waiting until you're ready, about starting before you're sure. Because he said something in that interview that stuck in my ribs like a nail. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be more curious than afraid, and that line echoed in my head as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about all the years I'd been more afraid than curious, afraid of starting again, afraid of being irrelevant, afraid of being alone, and maybe those fears never leave, maybe they're just part of aging, but maybe curiosity is the lever that moves the weight, maybe asking, what if, is stronger than saying, too late, and when I closed my eyes that night, I imagined Kyle opening my email, looking at that photo of the trophy, remembering his hand in mine on that podium, remembering the sound of the crowd, the flash of the camera, the way we laughed like kings, and I hoped, quietly, humbly, that it made him feel something more than just nostalgia, that it stirred something alive, because what I was starting to learn, what I was beginning to really understand, was that the past is only dead if you stop sending messages forward, and maybe every project, every robot, every blinking light was my message from the past, saying, I'm still here. I still remember. I still want to build with you, and that hope, however fragile, however foolish, was enough to keep going, enough to show up next Saturday with new schematics, enough to sweep the garage floor even though my knees hated me for it, enough to buy a soldering iron that didn't spark when you plugged it in, enough to finally take the picture frame off the wall and dust it off and set it on the workbench beside me. Not as a relic but as a reminder that the hands I used to teach were still out there, somewhere, typing emails, clicking links, maybe even smiling at a memory of lightning tearing through the lawn with the engine screaming like joy, and that's when I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe until now. This wasn't just about rediscovering purpose, this was about repairing the connection, not just between wires and circuits but between father and son, past and present, regret and redemption, and maybe, just maybe, that connection could carry power again, not just a charge to blink an LED, but a charge strong enough to wake up the part of me that thought it was too late, because the truth, the secret, the revelation Elon had planted in my head like a seed, was this: you're never too old to be part of the future, you just have to build your way into it. It started as a joke, or at least I thought it was, one of those half-serious remarks you make when the room's quiet and you're just trying to fill it with something hopeful, something absurd enough to sound like dreaming again, and I said to the kids in the Saturday workshop, maybe one day we'll build a rocket in my garage, and they all laughed like I knew they would. Because the idea of an old man with stiff knees and a creaky back launching something into space from a grease-stained concrete slab behind his house sounded like the kind of fairy tale adults tell when they want to seem less tired, but one of the boys, Max, 11 years old, hair like a mop, eyes that never stopped moving, raised his hand and said, dead serious, could we though? And I paused, mid-solda, and looked at him, and I didn't have a quick answer, not because the idea was impossible, but because for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to laugh off an idea that big, and instead I said, well, not a full-size rocket, not yet, but we could build a model, something real, something with fuel and guidance and launch controls, and that lit them up, all of them, like a string of bulbs finding power for the first time, and suddenly we weren't just wiring circuits anymore, we were talking trajectory and propulsion and fins and fuel types, and someone brought up SpaceX and Elon and I told them what I'd read, that he started building rockets by teaching himself from books, that he wasn't an aerospace engineer by training but by obsession, that failure didn't stop him, it trained him, and the kids soaked it up like I was handing out candy. And by the time class ended, we'd drawn our first blueprint in dry erase marker across the whole length of the whiteboard, with stick figure astronauts and labeled stages and a checklist of parts we didn't have yet but were already planning to find, and I walked out of that room with something burning in my chest that hadn't burned in decades, not just pride but possibility, the sense that something larger was forming around me, something made of hope and plastic and maybe a little bit of crazy. And when I got home, I cleared half the garage without thinking, moved out the old lawnmower, stacked the winter tires, boxed up the Christmas lights, and laid down a new tarp like I was preparing a launch pad, because maybe I was, and I wrote a list, a real one this time. Not just things to buy but things to learn, oxidizer ratios, nozzle design, 3D printing materials, telemetry basics, and as I wrote, I remembered what it felt like to study with purpose, not for a test but for a goal, for a mission, and the next day I drove 45 minutes to the nearest hobby store. The kind that still had balsa wood and Estes motors and a guy behind the counter who wore a NASA cap and didn't blink when I said I was building a guidance system with a bunch of middle Schoolers, he just nodded like he'd heard Wilder and asked what kind of range I was going for, and 3 hours later I left with a bag full of materials and a head full of warnings about safety zones and igniter types and FAA notifications, and when I got back I couldn't stop pacing, like the idea itself was too big to sit still for, and I looked around the garage and realized something. This place wasn't just a storage room anymore, it was becoming a lab, a studio, a shrine to starting over, and I tacked up blueprints on the wall, next to the photo of Kyle and me with the lightning go-kart, and it made sense in a way I couldn't explain, that we used to build things that moved on wheels and now I was trying to build something that flew, because maybe that's what growth looks like, not giving up the past but building on it until it lifts off, and I started filming short clips of our progress during the workshops, just little updates, the kids talking about combustion or modeling air drag with cardboard cones, and I posted them to that same maker forum where I'd shared my first blinking light, and to my surprise, people started following along, not hundreds but enough to matter, enough to feel like a ripple, and one night I got a message from a retired aerospace technician in Arizona who offered to review our design and give feedback, and I said yes, of course I said yes, and suddenly I wasn't just teaching, I was learning again, and it felt like being alive in a way that went deeper than breath, like I was finally using all the years instead of just carrying them, and then something strange happened. Kyle called, not emailed, not texted, but actually called, and when I answered, there was a pause, like he hadn't planned what to say, and then he just said, "Dad, are you building a rocket?" And I laughed, a big deep laugh that cracked open something old and brittle, and I said, "Sort of," and he said, "I saw the video, the one with the blueprint and the soda bottle launch test, and I think it's awesome," and then he added, "It kind of reminded me of the go-kart," and I told him I'd thought the same thing, and there was a quiet moment, a warm one, and then he said, "I've got some old Arduino boards I never used, want me to ship them?" And I almost said no, out of habit, out of fear of being a burden, but instead I said, "Yeah. That'd be great," and it was more than great, it was a bridge being rebuilt, one circuit at a time, and I hung up the phone and just stared at the workbench, hands trembling not from age but from something else, from the weight of reconnection, from gratitude, and in the days that followed, our little garage rocket lab kept growing, more kids showed up, someone donated a used laptop for telemetry code, one of the parents brought in a box of servos and sensors, and Megan started talking about turning it into a permanent program. The Rocket Garage, she called it, and I didn't argue, because the name fit, because that's exactly what it was, a place where things that seemed stuck finally got to move again, and as I drilled mounting holes into the latest model frame, I thought about something Elon had said in an old video I found, a grainy clip from years ago where he said, "The future is built by people who decide it matters," and that stuck with me, like it was meant for me, like it was aimed right at this garage, at these kids, at this old man who decided not to fade quietly, and when we finally did our first proper launch, just a 2-stage model with a microcontroller logging altitude, we all stood back 20 yards while the countdown played from a speaker we'd rigged up, and Max did the honors, and when the rocket shot up, spinning slightly, trailing white smoke against the gray morning sky, I swear time stopped for half a second, just long enough for every one of us to feel it. That lift, that thrust, that shared miracle of building something together that moved, and when it arced back down under a half-inflated parachute and landed in the gravel, the kids ran toward it like it was treasure, and I just stood there, watching, breath held, hands shaking, heart wide open, and I whispered to no one, "We did it," and I knew then, without a doubt, that this wasn't just a rocket, this was a resurrection. The day Kyle came home was a quiet one, the kind of unassuming Tuesday that sneaks up on you like a whisper, not with fanfare or some swelling movie score moment but with a simple knock on the garage door as I was hunched over the new rocket base, tightening a bolt with more force than necessary because my hands were tired and my thoughts were stuck in a loop about torque ratios and guidance calibration and whether the parachute chute pack was too tight, and then there it was, that knock, that familiar rhythm I hadn't heard in 15 years but recognized in an instant, and I froze, wrench mid-turn, heart skipping a beat that sounded like a forgotten song, and I turned and opened the side door and there he was. Older, taller, his jaw sharper than I remembered but his eyes still that same mix of mischief and calculation I used to see when he'd take apart the toaster just to prove he could fix it better, and he stood there holding a cardboard box labeled "Old Nerd Stuff" and grinned like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to smile, and I said, voice rougher than I wanted, "You get taller," and he said, "You get smaller," and we laughed, not loud, not long, but enough, and I stepped aside and let him in. And the garage somehow got warmer without the heater changing a thing, and for the first few minutes, we didn't talk about the past, didn't touch the heavy things still floating between us, we just unpacked the box, Arduino boards, sensors, a Raspberry Pi, some old code printouts. And we got to work like no time had passed, and that's when I realized that building together had always been our language, our bridge, and maybe it always would be. And as he soldered a pin header with hands steadier than mine and asked about the kids in the workshop, I told him their names, their quirks, the way Max always added an extra booster to everything, just in case, the way Emily refused to use anything that wasn't color-coordinated, and he laughed like he meant it and said, "Sounds like you've got a crew," and I nodded and said, "Yeah, they're sharp," and then, after a pause, "They remind me of someone," and he looked at me and said, softer than before, "I missed this," and I said, without flinching, "Me too," and it didn't erase everything, didn't rewrite the years of silence, the missed calls, the birthdays marked only by guilt, but it cracked something open, just wide enough for light to start slipping in, and we kept working late into the night, the kind of late that sneaks into early, until the garage felt like it did back when we built Lightning, wires everywhere, sketches on napkins, parts scattered like possibilities. And sometime around 2 in the morning, as we waited for the print bed to finish shaping a nose cone, he looked at the wall where the old photo still hung, me and him, arms over shoulders, grinning like fools beside a go-kart with duct tape numbers and a crooked steering wheel, and he said, "I forgot how good that felt," and I said, "I didn't," and the silence after that wasn't awkward or heavy, it was earned, and the next few weeks blurred into something I hadn't felt since Barbara passed, maybe. Even before that, momentum with meaning, time with purpose, each day anchored by action, by something real being built, and Kyle kept coming back, not every day, but often enough that the kids started calling him Rocket Jr. and asking him to explain terminal velocity and PID loops, and he'd smile that sideways smile of his and break it down better than I ever could, and I just watched sometimes, from the workbench or behind the whiteboard, this grown man who used to be my curious little boy now teaching others with the same fire I used to carry, and it humbled me in ways I didn't expect, made me realize that legacy isn't just about what you leave behind, it's about what you pass forward, and one afternoon, after a particularly successful hover test using a drone frame we'd modified for vertical thrust simulation, Kyle and I sat on the tailgate of my truck, drinking root beer from glass bottles like we used to, and he asked, without looking at me, "Do you ever regret it?" And I knew what he meant, not just the years we lost, but the time I spent chasing work, fixing what was broken outside the house while things were cracking inside, and I thought about lying, about brushing it off with a joke or a, "We did our best," but instead I said, "Yeah, I do. More than I say." I thought I had more time to fix it than I did, and he nodded, slow, thoughtful, and said, "I didn't come back to hold it against you," and that hit me like a wave, because I realized that somewhere deep down I had been waiting for punishment, for a reckoning that might never come, and what he offered instead was the only thing more powerful than blame, grace, and I said, "I'm proud of you," and he looked at me, eyes wet but not falling, and said, "I know," and we sat like that until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the driveway like a curtain falling on an old chapter, and the very next day, something remarkable happened, our second launch went public. Not just a workshop thing but a real event, community center lot blocked off, tables set up, kids in matching, Rocket Garage shirts, parents clapping, reporters from the local paper snapping photos, and right there in the middle of it all was me, gray-haired, slightly hunched, holding a mic I didn't ask for but was handed anyway, and I said something I hadn't planned. Something that just came out when someone asked what inspired me to start all this at my age, and I said, I thought the future was something that stopped belonging to you after a certain age. Turns out, it's just waiting for you to show up again, and people clapped and Kyle smiled and I felt taller somehow, like the weight of waiting had finally lifted, and when we counted down and hit ignition and that rocket screamed into the sky like it had something to prove, I knew, deep in my bones, that I had built more than a machine, I had rebuilt a life. It was just a tweet, that's what everyone kept saying afterward, just a tweet, just a few words typed out by a man on a phone who probably didn't even think twice about it, who probably sends hundreds of them in a month between launching rockets, steering companies, and dreaming up futures, but to me, to us, it was a flare shot into the sky. A jolt of recognition so powerful I actually dropped the coffee mug I was holding when I saw it, watched it roll across the garage floor as my phone screen glowed with a screenshot someone had sent me, a direct message from Megan that said simply, "Look at this right now," and there it was, plain as day on Elon Musk's official Twitter account, a reposted video clip of our latest community launch with the caption, "Never too old to build the future." Rocket Garage is proof, and my heart slammed into my ribs so hard I thought I might be having a heart attack, because it wasn't just the fact that he'd seen it, or even that he'd shared it. It was what he wrote, those 10 simple words that wrapped around my chest like a safety harness mid-fall, because it meant he understood what we were trying to do, what I was trying to say by showing up every Saturday with shaky hands and a toolbox, what it meant to take something as audacious as space and put it into the hands of a bunch of kids and an old man who once thought his building days were over. And the ripple effect of that tweet was instant, relentless, overwhelming in the best and most terrifying ways possible. My inbox exploded, the Rocket Garage email account got flooded with messages from teachers, engineers, retired mechanics, college students, and more than a few people who just said, "I thought I was too old too. Thanks for proving me wrong," and the video itself, nothing fancy, just a clean-cut 45 seconds of our last launch spliced with a clip of me talking about legacy and late starts, shot past 1 million views by midnight, and I sat there in the garage, staring at the monitor while the kids' cheers played on a loop in the background, and I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since Barbara died. I felt seen, truly seen, not just as a helper or a has-been or some sweet old man tinkering with wires, but as a builder again, a contributor, someone who still had something worth listening to. And Kyle called that night, his voice buzzing with disbelief and excitement and something softer underneath, something like awe, and he said, "Dad, do you know what this means?" And I said, "No. Do you?" And we both laughed, a little scared, a little giddy, because we knew something had shifted, something big, and the next morning, the phone at the community center rang off the hook, people asking if we were expanding, if we could start satellite programs in other towns, if we could host virtual build-alongs, and Megan came over with 2 coffees and her laptop and said, "We need a website today," and suddenly we were a movement, not just a workshop, and part of me wanted to hit the brakes, to say it was all happening too fast, but another part of me, the louder part, the part that Elon's tweet had lit on fire, said, "Good. Let it burn. Let it grow. Let it go farther than you ever imagined," and by the end of that week, we had press interviews, donation requests, and even a message from a small aerospace startup offering to sponsor materials in exchange for us testing one of their student-designed stabilizers, and the kids. They ate it up, they doubled their attendance, showed up early, stayed late, started forming their own side teams for specific tasks, design crew, engine team, data tracking, media, and it felt less like a club now and more like a mission, a real one, and watching them grow into their own roles gave me this strange, buzzing kind of joy that felt electric and steady, like standing next to something huge and humming with life. And Kyle, to his credit, didn't pull back or shy away. If anything, he stepped up, started mentoring the older kids, helping set up a digital control station for remote monitoring, even taught a full session on orbital mechanics that left half the room dazed and the other half drawing diagrams on the whiteboard an hour after class ended. And it was in the middle of that chaos, that joy, that uncontainable newness that another message came, this time in the form of an email from someone on Elon's team, a polite, vaguely worded note asking if I'd be open to doing a short recorded segment for a series they were compiling on late bloomers in science and innovation. And my first reaction was disbelief, followed closely by panic, followed quickly by an almost childlike giddiness that had me calling Kyle, stumbling over my words like I was 17 again, and he said, calm and clear like always, "Say yes. We'll figure it out," and so I did. I said yes, and a week later, 2 young producers came to my house, polite and efficient and bursting with questions, and I gave them the tour, garage, workshop, launch field, and they asked me to sit on the same stool I used for soldering and just talk, just tell them what it felt like to start over, to be noticed, to be old and still in motion, and I said the truth, raw and unrehearsed. I used to think the world stopped listening after you turned 60. Now I know it just stops assuming you've got something to say. But if you speak anyway, if you build anyway, the right people hear you, and they liked that, wrote it down, said they might use it as the pull quote for the video, and I didn't really care what they did with it, because I already knew who it was for, someone out there, maybe sitting in their own cluttered garage with dust on their hands and doubt in their chest, someone like I was not long ago, needing a spark, needing proof, and maybe this would be it, maybe this would be the thing that tipped the scale. And after they packed up and left, I sat in the quiet and thought about how it all started, not with a vision or a strategy or a 5-year plan but with a single stubborn light blinking on a homemade circuit board, and that night, I dreamed of space, not metaphorically but literally, stars whipping past like streaks of promise, earth spinning below like a memory you never quite outgrow, and I woke up with tears on my cheeks and this single phrase in my head. You're still part of the mission, and I believed it, finally, completely, not because of the tweet or the video or even the growing program, but because of the kids, and Kyle, and the fire in my chest that hadn't gone out yet, not even close, and when I stepped back into the garage that morning and saw the half-built Stage 3 rocket engine waiting on the bench, I whispered, let's keep going. There's a moment in any project, no matter how big or small, where the shine wears off and the real work begins, where the novelty gives way to routine, where excitement becomes discipline, and that moment hit us about 3 months after Elon's tweet, when the cameras had stopped rolling and the reporters had moved on to the next shiny story, and the kids started showing up a little later, a little more distracted, phones buzzing more than hands building, and even I felt it, the slow return of that old weight in my bones, the kind that whispers maybe this is the peak, maybe you've gone as far as you can go, maybe you've had your moment and now it's time to ease back, let the younger ones take it from here. But I refused, not because I thought I could out-hustle time, but because I finally understood something Elon had said years ago in an interview, something I hadn't really heard until now: you don't slow down. You adapt, and those words rang in my ears every time I saw the energy dip, every time I looked at the half-assembled third-stage booster and felt the creeping urge to pack it away, because adapting wasn't about pretending you were 30 again, it was about finding new ways to keep the engine running even when the parts didn't fit the same. So I changed my approach, swapped long lectures for small team huddles, replaced whiteboard diagrams with hands-on builds, and gave more space for the kids to lead, and I watched as Emily stepped up to manage the propulsion group, as Max organized the wiring into labeled bins, as Kyle started letting them argue through design decisions without stepping in right away, and I realized that what we built wasn't just a rocket program. It was an incubator for leaders, for problem solvers, for kids who weren't waiting to be told they mattered. They were proving it one launch at a time, and somewhere in that process, the spark came back, not as a flash of fame or another viral post but as a steady, reliable hum of purpose, the kind you feel in your chest when you're tired but fulfilled. And one afternoon, after a particularly grueling session testing nozzle shapes and control delays, I sat with Kyle on the back steps of the garage and asked him if he ever missed the city, the fast pace, the endless options, and he just shrugged and said, I used to think I needed all that to feel important, but now this feels more real, and I nodded, not because I was proud of him, though I was, but because I knew exactly what he meant, because something happens when you strip life back down to its essentials. When you stop chasing big headlines and start building steady impact, and as fall crept in and the leaves browned and the nights grew sharper, we started prepping for our most ambitious launch yet, a fully guided flight with real-time telemetry and stage separation, not just a model rocket but something that felt, in our little world, like SpaceX in miniature, and the kids were all in, arriving early with thermoses of cocoa and printouts of code and charts scrawled in Sharpie on old pizza boxes. And for the first time, I wasn't just running the show. I was watching them own it, and it filled me with a kind of joy that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with faith that they'd take what we built and carry it farther than I ever could, and yet, despite all the progress, all the growth, I still had moments in the quiet when I'd walk into the garage late at night, after everyone had gone, and I'd run my hand along the smooth fuselage of the rocket and wonder how much time I had left, not just in years, but in usefulness, in energy, in relevance, because the truth about aging, the part no one tells you, is that it doesn't announce itself with a bang, it creeps in with small doubts and stiff joints and a sense that the world is moving just a little faster than you can chase it, and that night, I found myself standing there alone, surrounded by success, and still feeling the familiar shadow of fear tapping on my shoulder, and I did what I always did when that happened. I watched Elon, pulled up one of his old talks, this one about failure, about how he'd expected rockets to explode, about how he budgeted for disaster and still showed up anyway, and he said, with that flat, calm certainty of someone who's risked everything, if something is important enough, even if the odds are against you, you should still do it, and I repeated that line out loud to the empty garage, and I looked at the rocket and said, "You're important enough," and maybe I meant the kids. Or the mission, or maybe I meant myself, finally, maybe I meant that this stage of my life, this so-called last act, wasn't about fading away but about launching the part of me I thought was lost forever, and 2 weeks later, we launched again, on a cold, clear Saturday morning, with a crowd of nearly 100 watching from the community center lot, parents holding coffee cups, toddlers in mittens pointing skyward, and we stood behind the barrier, Kyle and I shoulder to shoulder, the kids lined up at their stations, countdown ready. Systems go, and when we hit ignition and the rocket screamed to life, it was like time slowed down just enough for me to feel everything, the cold in my fingers, the hum of the crowd, the vibration of the control panel beneath my hand, and most of all, the lift, the perfect, glorious lift of something we built together leaving the earth, chasing the sky with no apology, and when the first stage separated clean, and the second ignited mid-air, and the telemetry started streaming real-time numbers onto the screen, the kids erupted in cheers, hugging each other, high-fiving, some even crying, and I just stood there, watching the dot on the screen as it reached peak altitude, and for the first time in decades, I felt whole. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything mattered, and after it landed, after the data was analyzed and the pieces collected and the photos taken, Kyle came over to me, held out a folded piece of paper, and said, "Thought you'd want to see this," and it was a letter, handwritten, from one of the kids, Sarah, the quiet one who hardly spoke but always showed up early, and it read, "I used to think I was too weird to belong anywhere. Then you showed me that people who build rockets in garages are the coolest people in the world. Thank you for giving me a place," and I folded it back up and slipped it into my shirt pocket like it was something sacred, and I looked at Kyle and said, "We're not slowing down," and he said, "No, Dad. We're just getting started." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Rejection has a way of sneaking in when you least expect it, not as a dramatic crash but as a slow drip that wears away your confidence, and after the launch, after the viral video and Elon's tweet and all the cheers, we hit a wall, not with the kids or the project, but with the reality of funding and skepticism from the town's council and a local newspaper editorial that called our efforts a cute hobby with no practical future. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table late one night, the same table where Barbara and I had planned our family's future decades ago, the silence pressing down on me heavier than the autumn wind rattling the window panes, and Kyle was there too, his face tired but determined, and I could see the same question burning in both of our eyes, is it worth fighting for? And it was in that moment, when the shadows were longest and the doubt felt like a tide pulling us under, that I found myself scrolling through Elon Musk's older interviews, searching for something, anything to keep going, and I landed on a line that hit me like a freight train: failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough, and I thought about the letters we'd received from the kids, from parents, from people who said we'd sparked something in them they thought was long gone, and I realized that rejection was part of the process, that every great leap forward was built on a pile of no's and setbacks and failures, and that gave me a strange kind of courage, because I knew if we folded now, we'd be handing that courage back, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not for myself, not for the kids, not for the dream that still burned in the back of my mind, bright and reckless as a shooting star, and so the next morning, we drafted a proposal to the council, not just asking for money but inviting them to be part of the journey, to see the impact in real time, to witness what happens when a community believes in late bloomers, in dreamers who refuse to quit. And I stood in front of that council, my hands shaking slightly but my voice steady, and I said, "We're not just building rockets. We're building futures. Futures that remind us all that it's never too late to aim higher." And for a moment, the room was silent, the kind of silence that feels like a crossroads, and then the mayor nodded, a small, reluctant smile breaking through, and we got a grant, not a lot, but enough to keep going, enough to prove that persistence wasn't just a buzzword but a lifeline, and that was the first of many battles, each one tougher than the last, but each one met with the same grit and determination that Elon had shown when SpaceX's early rockets exploded over the desert and the world said he was crazy and that he should give up. And every time I felt the weight of age, of limits, of too old, I'd remind myself, Musk didn't quit when the world doubted him, and neither would I, because the power of rejection wasn't just in the nose, it was in what you choose to do next, and with that mindset, the garage became a fortress, a place where failure was welcome as a teacher, where every mistake was a lesson learned, where the kids learned to rewire, rebuild, rethink, and come back stronger, and the program grew. Not just in numbers but in spirit, and the quiet ones found their voices, the doubtful found their courage, and I found my purpose again, fierce and unyielding, fueled by rejection and the relentless belief that the next no was just a step toward the yes that would change everything, and Elon's words echoed through every setback, every doubt, a reminder that failure isn't the enemy of success. It's the pathway, the crucible where new ideas are forged and where those brave enough to keep going find their true power. And so we kept building, kept launching, kept dreaming, because we knew that the power of rejection wasn't just in the pain, it was in the fire it ignited, and that fire burned bright in all of us. You know that feeling, the one that creeps up quietly but hits like a brick wall, the moment you realize the world has stopped looking your way, that the loud, vibrant life you used to know is now a whisper, a shadow, a background hum that no longer commands attention. For me, it was the first time I walked into a tech conference and heard the younger engineers joking about how old-timers, like me, just couldn't keep up, like our ideas were fossils buried under new, shiny innovations. I felt invisible, like a ghost in the room, like the faded version of the man I once was, and I couldn't help but ask myself, is this it? Am I done? The bitter truth was that aging in America, especially for those of us over 60, often means being sidelined, a slow fading from relevance and respect. But somewhere deep inside, a part of me refused to accept that as my story. It was Elon Musk's voice, his fearless defiance of limits, that haunted me, his insistence that the impossible was just an opinion, not a rule etched in stone. He said once, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor, and that phrase became my mantra, my shield against the creeping doubt. I realized that the invisible ceiling wasn't just about age, it was about the stories we tell ourselves about what's possible. So I made a decision, no, a promise, to break through that ceiling, not with arrogance or reckless ambition, but with steady, relentless action, with the quiet confidence of someone who spent a lifetime learning, failing, and still believing in the next breakthrough. I started by reaching out to people I admired in tech and education, asking for advice, for mentorship, for partnership, and to my surprise, many responded with warmth, with encouragement, even with stories of their own struggles with age and doubt. That gave me fuel. Then came the hardest part, sharing my vision publicly, unapologetically, not hiding behind excuses or age but owning my place as an innovator at any stage of life. I gave talks at community centers, wrote op-eds in local papers, and started a podcast called Late Bloomers Launch, where I interviewed people over 60 who were doing extraordinary things, from artists to coders to scientists, and the response was electric. People who felt forgotten started calling in, writing emails, sharing their own dreams deferred but not destroyed. It was like we'd stumbled onto a secret society of rebels refusing to fade away quietly. Meanwhile, the Rocket Garage program became a beacon, proof that innovation doesn't belong to the young exclusively. Elon's influence lingered like a shadow and a guidepost, his drive, his refusal to accept no as the final answer, pushed us to dream bigger, to launch higher, and to build smarter. We hosted workshops, invited guest speakers from local universities, and even started collaborating with a startup that specialized in sustainable rocket fuels, a sector Elon had publicly championed. The kids weren't just learning about rockets anymore, they were becoming part of a larger ecosystem of innovation. But breaking the invisible ceiling wasn't just about public victories, it was personal too. I had to confront my own fears head-on, the voice that whispered I was too old, too slow, too out of touch. I had to remind myself daily that age was a fact, but limitation was a choice. There was a moment, late one night, when I found myself staring at a blank page, trying to write an essay on what it means to reinvent yourself after 60, and tears came unexpectedly, not from sadness but from relief that I was finally telling my own story. Refusing to be erased. I thought about Elon Musk again, how he'd turned failure into fuel, how he'd built companies that challenged entire industries, how he kept pushing even when the world doubted him, and I realized that breaking the ceiling was about mindset first and foremost. It was about refusing to let society's expectations define your worth or your future. That realization changed everything. It gave me a new sense of purpose, a fire that burned brighter with every challenge. And as we prepared for the next big launch, with a rocket designed by the kids and built by the community, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a surge of excitement that wasn't about proving anyone wrong but about proving to myself that I was still capable of creating, leading, inspiring. When the countdown began and the rocket soared into the sky, cutting through the blue with power and grace, I knew that we'd done more than build a machine. We'd shattered an invisible barrier, proving that innovation, passion, and impact have no expiration date. And in that moment, I whispered to the sky, we are just getting started. The hardest part about aging, I've learned, isn't the physical changes or the slowing down, it's the sense that purpose, once so clear, begins to blur, like a photograph fading under years of sunlight. After decades of working, raising a family, and trying to keep pace with the world, there's this silent question that creeps in, what now? For me, that question was like a shadow that followed every step I took after I retired from my long-time job, a constant reminder that my identity was tangled up in what I did, not who I was. But then Elon Musk's words came back to me, not as hype or motivation but as a challenge. Constantly think about how you could be doing things better. Keep questioning yourself. It struck me that maybe purpose wasn't something you find once and hold on to forever. It was something you reimagine, redefine, and reclaim at every stage. I started by asking myself what I truly cared about now, what legacy I wanted to leave behind, not in grand monuments or awards but in the small ripples that touch real lives, and I realized the rocket project was more than a hobby or a nostalgic attempt to relive my youth, it was a bridge to a future I still wanted to build. That shift in thinking was like a door opening in a dark room. I stopped measuring myself by outdated standards and started looking for meaning in connection. In learning, in contribution. I began mentoring not just the kids in the rocket program but others in my community, people who felt stuck or sidelined, who thought their best days were behind them, just like I had. I discovered a well of energy in helping others find their spark, and Elon's example of relentless curiosity and risk-taking was the fuel that kept that well full. I remember a rainy afternoon when I sat with a woman named Linda, a retired nurse who had always dreamed of painting but never dared to start, and as we talked about fear and failure and dreams deferred, I realized that reimagining purpose wasn't about doing something radically new, it was about giving yourself permission to begin again, to start small and grow, just like we had done with the rockets. That mindset transformed the rocket garage into more than a workshop, it became a sanctuary of possibility, a place where age was no barrier, and curiosity was the only requirement. We held open nights, inviting seniors and young people alike to come learn, build, and share stories, and the energy was electric, a mix of nostalgia, hope, and rebellion against the notion that time had run out for us. Elon's fearless approach to tackling impossible problems inspired us all to think bigger, to embrace discomfort, and to push boundaries, not just in science but in life. The community began to change, too. What was once a quiet, aging town started to buzz with new ideas and collaborations, from sustainable gardening projects to local tech startups, many of which had roots in the connections formed in that garage. The rocket program had become a catalyst, not just for youth but for a multi-generational movement of reinvention and resilience. And through it all, I learned that purpose is fluid, a living thing that grows and shifts as we do. It's found in the joy of teaching a child to solder a circuit, in the laughter shared over failed experiments, in the quiet pride of building something meaningful together. It's found in the refusal to accept that the best chapters of life are behind us. That belief carried me through the days when the aches were worse, when the doubts resurfaced, when the world outside felt indifferent, and I realized that reimagining purpose was the ultimate act of defiance against the silence of invisibility. Elon Musk never talked about aging in the usual way. His vision was always about expanding the horizon, pushing the limits, imagining futures that seemed impossible, and that vision became our beacon, guiding us to see aging not as an end but as a chance to create, to lead, and to inspire in ways we hadn't before. So I stand here today, looking out at the garage filled with tools, blueprints, and the hum of creativity, knowing that reimagining purpose is the real rocket fuel, the power that lifts us beyond fear, beyond limits, beyond time itself. Loneliness is one of the cruelest parts of aging. It creeps in silently, sometimes unnoticed until the silence feels deafening. After my wife passed away, and with my children living scattered across the country, I felt the walls of my small home closing in, the quiet rooms echoing with memories and the weight of lost time. I'd grown accustomed to being alone, but not to feeling invisible, like the world was moving on without me. That's when Elon Musk's words unexpectedly became a lifeline again. I stumbled across an interview where he talked about collaboration, not just within companies but across disciplines and communities, and how the future belongs to those who build bridges, not walls. The phrase hit me hard because for so long, I'd been retreating behind walls of grief and doubt, cutting myself off from the world when what I really needed was connection. I realized that if I wanted to feel alive again, to matter again, I had to start building bridges. Connecting with others, sharing my story, and inviting them to share theirs. I began by reaching out to neighbors I'd barely spoken to, inviting them to join us in the Rocket Garage for workshops, storytelling nights, and simple gatherings. At first, there was hesitation, old habits, old fears, but slowly, the walls started to crumble. One evening, a woman named Mary, a widow like me, showed up with her grandson, who was fascinated by the rockets. Another neighbor, Mr. Thompson, a retired engineer, offered to help with the design process. What began as a small group grew into a vibrant community, a patchwork of people from different ages, backgrounds, and experiences, all brought together by curiosity and a shared desire to belong. The garage became a hub, alive with laughter, debates, and the clatter of tools, a place where generations connected over shared challenges and dreams. Elon's example reminded me that innovation isn't just about technology, it's about people. His ability to bring together teams that seemed impossible to assemble, to unite engineers, artists, scientists, and dreamers under a common goal, was something we could emulate on a smaller scale. And it worked. The energy was contagious. Kids who had felt isolated found mentors, adults rediscovered purpose in teaching, friendships blossomed in the unlikeliest places. I watched as barriers of age, race, and background fell away, replaced by a powerful sense of community and mutual respect. One night, as we prepared for a test launch, I caught myself smiling for the first time in months. The loneliness that had once felt like a permanent shadow was now just a memory, replaced by the warmth of belonging and the thrill of creating something together. But building bridges also meant confronting old wounds and learning to forgive, not just others but ourselves. I reached out to my estranged daughter, Amy, after years of silence, inspired by Elon's fearless communication style and his willingness to face hard truths. Our conversation started awkwardly, tentative and fragile, but over time, we rebuilt trust, brick by brick. Elon's example showed me that even the biggest challenges, whether a failing rocket or a broken relationship, could be overcome with persistence, honesty, and a shared vision. In those moments, I saw that building bridges was as much about healing as it was about connection. It was about breaking down the walls that fear and pain had built and creating pathways for new beginnings. That's the legacy I wanted to leave, Not just rockets or inventions, but a community where everyone mattered, where no one was left behind or forgotten. Elon Musk's vision for the future was bold, daring, sometimes controversial, but at its core was a deep belief in the power of human connection and collaboration. And in our small town, in our rocket garage, that belief was taking root, growing stronger with every shared story, every helping hand, every bridge built. I realized then that the future Elon spoke of, the future I wanted to be part of, wasn't just about technology or space travel. It was about people coming together, breaking isolation, and creating a world where age, loss, and loneliness didn't define us but challenged us to build something better. As the rocket soared into the sky that night, trailing fire and hope, I felt those bridges lifting us all higher, connecting our hearts and dreams, proving that no one, no matter their age, is ever truly alone. Starting over isn't something most of us expect to do after 60. It feels like the final chapter, a time to slow down, settle into routine, and accept the life we've built. But life has a way of surprising you, of shaking the foundations when you least expect it, and sometimes, that shake is exactly what you need. After the loss of my wife and years of drifting, I found myself stuck in a pattern of comfort that had become a cage. The days blurred together, filled with the same quiet loneliness, until one morning, a headline caught my eye. Elon Musk was talking about the future of humanity, and how the biggest risk is not taking any risk, and that phrase echoed in my mind like a call to arms. I realized that starting over wasn't about erasing the past but about building on it, about finding the courage to dream again, no matter the odds or the years behind me. That courage came in many small moments, the first time I opened the garage door and felt the rush of possibility, the first time I reached out to my estranged daughter and heard her voice after years of silence, the first time I stood in front of a group of kids and shared my story, knowing I was more than just my age or my losses. Elon's example was a beacon. He had faced setbacks, failures, and public doubt yet kept forging ahead, reinventing industries and himself, and that fearless reinvention inspired me to look at my own life through a new lens. I began to see starting over not as a defeat but as a brave new chapter, full of unknowns but also of promise. The rocket project became my anchor, a symbol of that new beginning. With each design tweak, each test launch, I was rewriting my story, proving that creativity and ambition don't fade with time, they evolve. The community around the garage grew too, people drawn not just by the rockets but by the spirit of reinvention. Stories poured in, retirees going back to school, friends opening businesses they dreamed of, neighbors learning new skills, and I realized we were all part of this collective courage to start over. But starting over also meant facing fears head-on, fear of failure, of rejection, of being too late, and learning to move forward anyway. I remember the night before a big launch, staring at the blueprint, my hands trembling, wondering if I was foolhardy to keep trying, and then I thought of Elon's relentless optimism, his belief that failure was simply feedback, a step on the path to success, and that gave me the strength to push through the doubt. It wasn't just about rockets or technology. It was about proving to myself and others that life after 60 wasn't a slow decline but a chance to reinvent, to take risks, to start over with wisdom and passion. I also found that starting over meant letting go of old identities and expectations. I was no longer just a retired engineer or a grieving husband, I was a mentor, an innovator, a community builder, someone who could still make a difference. That shift in identity was liberating, opening doors I thought were closed forever. There were moments of struggle, of course, days when the aches and fatigue made me question if I had the stamina, times when doubt whispered that maybe I should just accept the status quo, but each time, I came back to Elon's words and the faces of the kids who believed in what we were doing, and that was enough to keep moving forward. Starting over became a daily practice, a mindset, a commitment to embrace change and possibility at any age. It wasn't about denying the past or pretending it didn't hurt. It was about weaving those experiences into a new narrative, one that honored where I'd been and where I was going. And as the rocket soared higher with every successful launch, I saw that courage reflected in the eyes of everyone involved, a shared triumph over fear and inertia. Elon Musk once said, "People should pursue what they're passionate about. That will make them happier than pretty much anything else," and I realized that starting over was really about reclaiming passion, no matter the stage of life. It was about having the courage to say yes to new beginnings, to challenges, to dreams deferred but not forgotten. So here I am, still building, still dreaming, knowing that the courage to start over isn't just a luxury for the young, it's a necessity for anyone who refuses to let time define their story. The future is unwritten, and with that courage, we can write new chapters that surprise, inspire, and transform. I used to think learning was something you did when you were young, school, training, early career, and that after a certain age, the brain simply slowed down, and the opportunities to grow diminished. That belief kept me comfortable but stagnant for years. Then one afternoon, watching a documentary about Elon Musk's relentless curiosity and how he taught himself rocket science, coding, and business strategy, I was struck by a simple truth: learning isn't confined to youth. It's a lifelong process, a choice to stay engaged, curious, and hungry for knowledge no matter how many candles are on your birthday cake. Elon once said, "I think it is possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary," and that choice, I realized, was fueled by learning, by always asking questions, challenging assumptions, and seeking new skills. That day, I decided to make learning my weapon against complacency and invisibility. I enrolled in online courses on engineering updates and digital tools, started reading books on new technologies, and even took a basic programming class. At first, it felt like fumbling in the dark, words and concepts that seemed alien, but as I persisted, the fog began to lift. The excitement of understanding something new was intoxicating. The Rocket Garage became my laboratory not just for building rockets but for experimenting with new ideas and techniques. I encouraged everyone involved, young and old alike, to embrace mistakes as part of the learning curve, and together we created a culture of curiosity and humility. Elon's mindset was infectious. His willingness to dive deep into unfamiliar subjects and push the boundaries of his knowledge inspired us all. It wasn't about perfection but about progress, about daring to learn despite setbacks or the fear of looking foolish. I began to see that relentless learning was more than acquiring skills, it was a radical act of defiance against the idea that age limits potential. Every new concept I grasped, every small success in the garage, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been buried under years of doubt and routine. But the power of learning went beyond technical knowledge. I started reading philosophy, psychology, and biographies, seeking to understand not just how things worked but why people acted the way they did, what drove innovation, and how to build resilience. That broader understanding enriched my relationships and my leadership within the community. I learned to listen better, to ask deeper questions, and to value different perspectives. Elon's approach to problem solving, breaking down complex challenges into manageable parts and iterating relentlessly, became a blueprint for how we tackled obstacles together. It was humbling and exhilarating to realize how much I still didn't know, but even more empowering to know that the pursuit of knowledge was limitless. The young engineers taught me new software and design tools, while I shared decades of experience in troubleshooting and project management, creating a true exchange of wisdom. This intergenerational learning was a powerful reminder that knowledge flows in all directions and that every stage of life brings valuable insights. One evening, after a long day of testing and redesigning a critical component, I sat with a group of teenagers who looked to me as a mentor but were also teachers in their own right. We talked about the future, about fears and hopes, and how continuous learning was our ticket to staying relevant and alive in a rapidly changing world. Elon Musk's vision of a future shaped by innovation and curiosity was not some distant dream, it was something we could touch and build together every day. The transformation was profound. I no longer feared being left behind. Instead, I embraced the challenge of keeping pace with the world's rapid evolution, fueled by a hunger to learn and grow. That hunger was contagious, spreading through our community, sparking new projects, collaborations, and ambitions. The power of relentless learning reshaped my identity from bold to ongoing, from static to dynamic, from fading to flourishing. I realized that the mind is the ultimate frontier, and with curiosity as a compass, age becomes irrelevant. As Elon said, if you get up in the morning and think the future is going to be better, it is a bright day. Otherwise, it's not, and learning was my way of ensuring every day was bright. This chapter of my life became one of exploration and renewal, proving that it's never too late to become a student of the world again, to open new doors, and to rewrite the story of what's possible. Fear is the quiet enemy that creeps in unnoticed, especially as we age. It's the fear of failure, the fear of being irrelevant, the fear that the world has moved on and left us behind. For years, I let fear dictate my choices, keeping me small and safe, hiding from challenges that felt too daunting. But Elon Musk's fearless approach to life and innovation challenged everything I believed about fear. In a talk I watched late one night, Elon said, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor," and that simple statement hit me like a thunderbolt. What if fear wasn't a signal to stop but a signal to push harder? What if embracing fear was the secret to unlocking new potential? I began to reflect on my own fears, the fear of trying new things, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of physical decline, and realized how much power I had given them. Inspired by Elon's example, I made a decision, would face fear head-on, not by ignoring it but by using it as fuel to become fearless in my pursuit of purpose. The rocket project became my proving ground. Every time I doubted myself or felt overwhelmed by the technical challenges, I remembered Elon's boldness in the face of setbacks, launch failures, criticism, financial risks, and how he saw those as necessary steps rather than end points. I started to see my fears as challenges to overcome rather than walls to hide behind. The first real test came when we planned a launch that involved a complex new design. I was terrified of failure, afraid that the whole project would collapse and that I'd confirm everyone's unspoken doubts about my abilities. But I kept reminding myself of Elon's words and the bigger picture, the community we were building, the inspiration we were creating, the message that age and fear could not define us. On launch day, as the rocket lifted off with a roar, a wave of exhilaration washed over me. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into a driving force, a spark that pushed me beyond hesitation. I realized that fearlessness wasn't the absence of fear but the mastery of it. Facing fear also meant being vulnerable, admitting doubts and mistakes, asking for help, and embracing imperfection. In our group, that openness created a culture of trust and resilience. We celebrated failures as lessons and encouraged each other to take risks. Elon's transparency about his own struggles inspired us to share honestly and grow together. This shift changed everything. I felt freer, more alive, and more connected to those around me. The courage to face fear spilled into other parts of my life. I reconnected with old friends, reached out to new people, and even started writing about my journey, something I had been too afraid to do before. That act of sharing was terrifying and liberating all at once. Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of audacious goals taught me that the greatest risk is in doing nothing. I saw how fear often disguises itself as practicality or wisdom, but really, it's a barrier that keeps us from living fully. By fueling fearlessness, I found the strength to move forward despite uncertainty and doubt. One evening, I sat quietly watching the sunset after a day of working on a new rocket prototype, feeling the aches of age but also a profound sense of peace. Fear was no longer my captor but my compass, pointing me toward growth and possibility. Elon's vision of pushing humanity beyond Earth, of tackling challenges no one else dared to face, became a metaphor for my own journey, to push beyond the limits fear tried to impose. That courage to face fear, to fuel fearlessness, became my most valuable lesson. It proved that no matter our age, no matter the obstacles, the capacity to be brave, to innovate, and to live with purpose is always within reach. Fear may visit us, but it doesn't have to stay. We can choose to rise above it, to harness it, and to keep moving forward into a future we shape with our own hands. Failure has a reputation as the enemy, something to avoid, something that confirms our worst fears about ourselves. Growing up, I was taught that failure meant weakness, that mistakes were to be hidden, and that success was the only acceptable outcome. As I aged, that fear of failure only deepened. Each stumble felt heavier, each setback more permanent. I was trapped by the belief that at this point in my life, failure was not an option, it was proof that I was done. But Elon Musk taught me otherwise. Watching Elon's journey, I saw how failure wasn't the end but a vital part of progress. His companies have faced countless failures, rockets exploded, cars didn't work, stock prices plunged, and yet, each failure was a lesson, a catalyst that propelled him forward. Failure is an option here, Elon once said, if things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. That phrase rewired my thinking. It gave me permission to let go of perfection and embrace failure as a stepping stone rather than a dead end. This shift wasn't easy. It meant changing how I saw myself and the work I was doing. When a prototype rocket failed to launch properly, instead of sinking into despair, I started analyzing what went wrong, asking questions, and trying again. I shared those failures with my community openly, which in turn encouraged others to do the same. Together, we created a culture where failure was not shameful but celebrated as a sign of courage and progress. That openness transformed the Rocket Garage from a place of secret anxiety into a lab of innovation and hope. The first time I shared a blog post about one of our failures, I was terrified of judgment, but the response was overwhelming. People connected with the honesty and vulnerability, and many shared their own stories of setbacks and resilience. I realized that failure, when embraced, can become a powerful tool for connection and growth. Elon's example showed me that the path to success is rarely straight or smooth, it's full of twists, turns, and missteps that teach us what doesn't work so we can find what does. This mindset freed me to take risks I wouldn't have dared before, and those risks led to breakthroughs, not just in rocket design but in how I lived my life. I started new projects, pursued relationships, and shared my voice, knowing that failure was not a verdict but a necessary part of creation. Failure also humbled me. It reminded me that no matter how experienced or wise, we are all learners, and mistakes are part of the human condition. That humility deepened my empathy and patience, both with myself and with others. It helped me see the beauty in imperfection and the potential in every attempt. In embracing failure, I found freedom, the freedom to try, to innovate, to be imperfect, and to keep moving forward. That freedom reignited a passion for life I hadn't felt in years. Elon Musk's fearless attitude toward failure became a beacon, lighting the way through uncertainty and doubt. It taught me that the real failure is never trying at all, and that every stumble is a step closer to something greater. As I look back now, I see that failure was never the enemy. It was a teacher, a motivator, and a signpost on the journey to rediscovery and purpose. The legacy I want to leave is one where failure is welcomed, where courage to keep going is celebrated, and where age is never a barrier to dreaming, trying, and succeeding. As I entered this new chapter of my life, inspired by Elon Musk's relentless vision for the future, I began to realize that the most profound transformation wasn't just in me, it was in what I could build and leave behind. Building a future that matters isn't about grand monuments or fame, it's about impact, connection, and the legacy of hope we create for those who come after us. Elon Musk's work, from electric cars to reusable rockets, wasn't just about technology, it was about reshaping the world for the better, about daring to imagine what others said was impossible and then building it step by step. That kind of future building inspired me to ask, what can I build that will outlive me? What legacy can I create that speaks to the value of persistence, courage, and reinvention? The answer wasn't in distant planets or complex inventions but in the community around me and the stories we shared. The Rocket Garage project had grown beyond a personal hobby, it was now a hub of inspiration and collaboration, a place where people of all ages and backgrounds came together to dream, learn, and create. I realized that building a future that matters meant nurturing that spirit of possibility, encouraging others to take risks, learn relentlessly, and face fear with courage. Every successful launch was a symbol not just of technical achievement but of collective hope and resilience. Elon's message that the future belongs to those who innovate and adapt resonated deeply. I saw how innovation wasn't just for the young or the wealthy, it was for anyone willing to think differently and act boldly. That realization fueled my commitment to make technology and opportunity accessible to everyone, especially those like me who felt left behind or too old to change. We started outreach programs, teaching local seniors new skills, from digital literacy to basic engineering principles, turning doubt into confidence and isolation into connection. Watching the light in their eyes as they built their own small projects was one of the most powerful rewards of this journey. Building a future that matters also meant reconciling with the past, acknowledging regrets and losses but refusing to let them define or limit me. I reached out to family members and old friends, mending broken bridges and planting seeds for new beginnings. Those relationships became part of the legacy I was crafting, a legacy of healing and hope, of second chances and enduring love. Elon's own story, with its blend of triumph and controversy, showed me that the future isn't perfect and that true impact comes from persistence despite setbacks. It's about being bold enough to envision change and humble enough to learn along the way. I began documenting our journey, sharing not just successes but struggles, knowing that honesty and vulnerability could inspire others to take their own first steps. The future I wanted to build wasn't just technological, it was human. It was a future where age was no barrier, where community and creativity flourished, and where every person had the chance to contribute meaningfully. That vision gave me renewed purpose and energy. Elon Musk once said, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster," and I embraced that wisdom wholeheartedly. Change became my ally, not my adversary, and building a future that matters became a daily act of courage and commitment. As I stood watching another rocket lift off, surrounded by a diverse group of supporters, students, and friends, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. We were building more than machines, we were building hope, resilience, and a new narrative about what it means to grow older. The future was ours to shape, and with that power came responsibility, to dream bigger, to act boldly, and to never stop building. This is the legacy I want to leave, a future that matters, shaped by courage, learning, failure, and relentless hope. There was a time not long ago when I felt invisible, like the world had moved on without me, that my contributions, my experiences, and even my presence no longer mattered. That feeling of invisibility is common for many of us as we age. We become background noise, sidelined by society's obsession with youth and novelty. But Elon Musk, in his relentless drive to change the world and challenge every assumption, taught me that invisibility is a choice we refuse to accept. We have the power to become invincible, not by defying age but by embracing purpose, passion, and relentless action. That shift began quietly, with small moments that gradually built into something unstoppable. When I first started sharing my journey, opening up about fears, failures, and hopes, I found others listening. Not just listening, but engaging, responding, reaching out. My story, once hidden and ashamed, became a beacon. The Rocket Garage community, which started as a modest gathering of curious minds, grew into a movement fueled by intergenerational connection and shared dreams. Each conversation, each collaboration chipped away at the sense of invisibility, replacing it with connection and recognition. Elon Musk's own story is a testament to becoming invincible through boldness. Despite skepticism, failures, and relentless criticism, he pursued his vision with an unyielding spirit. Watching him navigate setbacks and emerge stronger reminded me that invincibility comes not from never falling but from the courage to rise each time. That lesson carried me through my darkest doubts. I began to see my age not as a limitation but as an asset, decades of experience, wisdom, and resilience that younger generations could learn from. I became a mentor, a guide, a catalyst for change in my community. This new identity was empowering. The feeling of being invisible dissolved as I stepped into roles that mattered. Leading projects, inspiring others, and advocating for the potential in every person, regardless of age. Social media, once intimidating, became a platform where I shared my story and engaged with a growing audience who saw in me a reflection of their own struggles and hopes. The comments and messages of encouragement became fuel, reminding me that invisibility is not our fate unless we accept it. Elon's quote echoed in my mind, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. I realized my importance, my value, and the importance of my voice. Invincibility, I learned, was less about physical strength and more about mental resilience and relentless purpose. It was about standing firm in the face of doubt, pushing through fear, and refusing to be sidelined. I remember a particular moment when a local newspaper featured our Rocket Garage project. The headline read, "Senior Innovators Defying Limits." Seeing those words printed, knowing the community was watching, was a powerful affirmation. It wasn't just about the rockets, it was about reclaiming visibility and proving that age does not equal invisibility. That moment sparked a surge of energy that carried me through new challenges. I reached out to policymakers, partnered with schools, and expanded our programs to include technology training for seniors across the region. Each step was a declaration of invincibility, a refusal to fade away quietly. The physical challenges of aging remained, but they no longer defined me. My mind, my spirit, and my purpose became stronger than ever. The invincibility I found was a beacon for others, lighting the way out of invisibility and into meaningful engagement with the world. Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of progress and refusal to accept limits inspired me daily to keep pushing boundaries. The journey from invisible to invincible taught me that our worth is not diminished by age but amplified by the courage to keep contributing, learning, and leading. As I look toward the future, I see not decline but potential, not endings but new beginnings. The power to be invincible lies within each of us, waiting to be awakened by purpose, passion, and fearless action. And that power, once claimed, changes everything. I always believed that aging was a slow fade into the background, a quiet retreat from relevance and purpose. For years, I carried the heavy burden of regret, doubt, and the creeping fear that my best days were behind me. But through this journey, sparked and sustained by the lessons from Elon Musk's fearless mindset, I've come to realize something revolutionary: I was never too old. In fact, the best was yet to come. That realization didn't come suddenly. It was the result of countless moments of struggle, breakthrough, and reflection. It was built from every failure embraced, every fear faced, every connection made, and every small step taken toward a new future. Elon Musk's vision taught me to reimagine what's possible, not just for humanity, but for myself. His belief in pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and defying odds became my guiding light in the darkness. One of the most powerful truths I uncovered is that age is not a limit but a lens, a way of seeing the world shaped by decades of experience, resilience, and wisdom. Rather than a countdown, it is a countdown to courage. The courage to take risks, to reinvent, to reclaim your story and rewrite the ending. I remember the moment it truly sank in. Standing in the rocket garage, watching a group of young and old collaborators launch a homemade rocket that soared higher than we dared hope, I felt tears welling up. The cheers, the smiles, the shared excitement, it wasn't just a victory for our project, it was a victory over the voice inside me that said I was done. The truth was clear: I was alive, vibrant, and just getting started. That day, I understood that the barriers I'd felt were not real. They were the echoes of societal myths about aging, echoed by my own fears. Elon's own life, filled with relentless reinvention and daring risks well beyond the age most people settle, shattered those myths. The lessons he taught me were simple but profound: don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to try. Keep pushing. The story I want to leave behind is not one of quiet resignation but of bold renewal. I want others to know that it's never too late to ignite new passions, to build new dreams, to create new legacies. I began reaching out to people who felt stuck or forgotten, sharing my journey and encouraging them to take their own first steps toward change. The response was overwhelming. There's a powerful hunger for hope and proof that reinvention is possible at any age. Elon's example, coupled with my own transformation, became a beacon for many. We started community groups, workshops, and support networks that focused not just on aging but on thriving. These spaces were alive with energy, ideas, and the unstoppable will to grow. The message was clear: age is a gift, not a limitation. This mindset shift transformed how I see myself and how others see me. The weight of invisibility lifted, replaced by a vibrant presence fueled by purpose and connection. I learned that the permission I was waiting for, the permission to matter, to be relevant, to take up space, was something I had to give myself. And once I did, everything changed. As I reflect on this journey, I'm filled with gratitude for every challenge that pushed me, every failure that taught me, and every moment of fear that I turned into courage. Elon Musk didn't just inspire technological revolutions, he ignited personal revolutions. The final lesson I hold close is this: your age is not your cage. It's the key to unlock the next chapter of your life. It's the proof of a journey traveled and the promise of adventures yet to come. I was never too old to change. I was never too old to dream. I was never too old to matter. And now, standing on the threshold of this new beginning, I invite you to join me. Whatever your age, whatever your past, whatever your fears, this moment is your starting line. The future is waiting, and it's brighter than you can imagine. The rocket is ready. Will you launch? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?